get a feel for who's here. So let me introduce myself. My name is Ahmed. I am one of the I'm still an instructor for Rutgers Coding Bootcamp. Taught 2 classes so far. I'm also the VP of Academics for Trilogy, and I am joined by, it looks like 18 people, many of whom are either my team members or former students. Christian, you want to introduce yourself?
I didn't know I was gonna have to do that. All right. My name's Christian. I was actually part of the very first class at Rutgers Coding Bootcamp. I guess now I work for. I keep saying I guess when I say that, but I work for Trilogy now. I am a curriculum engineer. I'm also, I guess, starting to do more similar events like this, whether that's for Greg's team, which does like tutoring and things like that, or for like Pavan. I don't know if anybody's met him. Like did his last hackathon. But yeah, that's me. I do a lot of curriculum stuff, and I'm here to help you guys.
Great. Matt, you want to go next?
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm Matt. I was in Ahmed's last class. Now also working for Trilogy as a data engineer and cleanup specialist. And we're going to learn React. Hey guys.
Tamer, you up?
Hey guys, I was actually in the first class at RCB along with Christian. We've been TAing alongside each other from then on. Now I am an academic support engineer at Trilogy, as well as the academic interview lead. So I get to interview all of our prospective students before they get to come into the class.
All right. So just to kind of keep things moving, how about we have the rest people introduce yourself by saying your name, if you're current a student, or if you graduated, who is your instructor? So Han, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm basically here for the food, but Ahmed was my instructor.
Great. Thank you, Han. Tom?
Hey, I just finished the Dan DeSalo's cohort 2 weeks ago, so I'm just going to brush up on React as well.
I cannot pronounce your name. Yalai?
Yeah, sorry. My name is actually Krishna. I don't know why it shows my last name here. So yeah, I mean, I was in Tom's also cohort. I was with Dan as my teacher. We recently just graduated about 2 weeks ago.
Congrats.
Thank
Tatiana?
Hi, I'm Tatiana. I just recently graduated and Ahmed was my instructor.
Wonderful. Tom C?
I was also in Dan's class. Just graduated a week or so ago.
Michael? Oh, did I skip somebody? No, I think Michael's next. Go ahead, Michael. Maybe I just... Michael? Okay, you're out. All right, Senthil?
Hey, I was in John's class and I just graduated 2 weeks ago.
Wonderful. Mohammed?
Yeah, I was in Dan's class and I also graduated 2 weeks ago, just looking to brush up on React.
All right, Isabel?
Hi, I actually just graduated. I was in John's class.
Great. And Anchal?
Yeah, hi. I graduated recently and I was in dance class. Just want to brush up React.
And H? All right, I'll skip H. Avani? All right. Now we know who's here. And then Matthew Mendel, are you here?
I am here. I was in Dan's class, just graduated a couple weeks ago.
Awesome. Glad to have you guys. And so great. So for some of you guys, this might be a class that's, too simple. I want to make sure we cover the basics before we even try to touch React Native next class. And so we're going to start from the top from the presentation. And then from there, I'm going to go through some of the key code examples. As you're going along, feel encouraged to stop me, ask questions, and then I will answer them to the best of my knowledge. And hopefully it's good enough. So let's get into it. We'll start off with welcome to React.js. So as we talked about in the class, the objective for us in introducing the subject is really not, I think when we teach React, it's not meant for it to be a spoon-feeding session like it was for JavaScript and jQuery. The reality is, and I want to give this perspective, having just graduated from the program, your objective should not be to say, I am a React expert. Even if you were taught the best React lessons of all time, you would not most often be taken seriously as a React expert coming straight out of a boot camp. It's going to take time, and you're going to have to sort of develop your chops professionally. the real value of what you want to take away from the subjects that I'll be reviewing today and over the next few days is enough exposure that you can continue to dive deeper, both inside, in React and in other fields. So one thing I would say as an example, in my very first class that I taught, I had a group build their entire final project in Angular 2. I didn't know Angular 2, didn't teach it, but a lot of the concept that they learned in React allowed them to adapt it to Angular 2. So truly the real takeaway is use this challenging material as an opportunity to really immerse and expose yourself to the craft of learning a difficult and new technology. So there was a bunch of resources that we recommended. I'll kind of skip through that though. My favorite is egghead.io though. So if you are going to invest in something, I would recommend that one. But let's start with asking the basic question. So what is React? So we talked about this in class, and React is an open source JavaScript library. It was built by Facebook specifically for the challenge of dealing with applications that have many changes at the same time. Am I sharing my screen? Am I good? Yeah?
We are looking at you. You're beautiful.
Oh, see, I love it when that happens.
We're so enamored by you that we just.
I know it always happens, and people just like let me run, and I'm like, okay, I will happily run with it. All right, great. Let me minimize this thingy jigger. Okay, cool. I'm gonna breeze through slides that I think you guys have probably heard more than enough times, but if anybody needs me to slow down, feel free to. So the big thing about React, as we talked about in class, is two things. It's intended for applications where a lot of data changes at the same time. So as an example, why doesn't somebody give me one? Tom Thompson, can you give me an example of a scenario in which React's ability to handle a lot of data changing at the same time would be relevant?
On Facebook, when you have a lot of other stuff going on?
Give me an example of what about Facebook?
Basically have like the Messenger, I think is probably one good one where you like have a chat app going.
Yeah, so Messenger is a good one. Another example is honestly like whenever you hit a like button. So when you hit the like button, it changes that example on the page. It may trigger another set of cascade of events. Singular changes to the UI propagate in many ways across the page. The second piece that's really critical to React is the component-based architecture. So every piece of the UI is a subcomponent of a larger component, and that allows us to kind of build both the layout and the logic in the same bundle. Okay. So, important thing to think about React. For most of you, as you probably realize in class and trying to build your own applications, React is not necessarily going to make your life easier, and that's not what it's intended for. What it's intended for is in building complex applications, you need a tool set that allows you to have a sense of order. And using vanilla JavaScript or jQuery doesn't give you that because you're often creating messy code, whereas React gives you some semblance of that order. So kind of scrolling through, the key aspect of it again is the components. And components kind of allowing you to both create discrete chunks of code for layouts and logic, as well as reusability. So if we're going to be using something like a messenger interface on many pages of the program, we can copy and paste that bundle of code or that component into many places in the DOM. All right, so going back to this concept, which is very important, is why don't we just use jQuery for everything? So when we work with jQuery alone, every time we click on, say, an event handler, like a click event on the page, it directly changes the DOM immediately. So if we were to, say, have a click counter in jQuery, we would have a function.onEvent click kind of snippet of code, and inside, we would change the DOM directly. React creates this middle virtual DOM that allows it to take in many events that are taking place, and then it handles that virtual DOM and renders it in different places. This is kind of a complicated idea to grasp hold of in the context of web, but it's much more clear when you start to think about React being adapted to mobile interfaces. So what do I mean by that? When it comes to React Native and other uses for React, what it effectively does is it has the same event handler that we've been using in jQuery, effectively saying when you click, something happens. But instead of directly changing the DOM, this virtual DOM is almost like an API of sorts. It captures the event, and then you can program inside of that virtual DOM different things that happen as a result of clicks. So for the purpose of React Native especially, this is relevant because in React Native, you are handling events, and instead of changing HTML, in the case of the DOM, you're actually going to be changing Android or iOS. So you're changing Java or Swift, or let's say you used React Native to create a HoloLens application, Microsoft's virtual reality application. It's the same concept. React is almost introducing an API to the front end. And that's kind of a powerful tool when it comes to web development. Questions about this concept? All right, cool. So scrolling through. So again,
Wait, actually, I have a question.
please. I can't see it. So if anybody's raising their hand, you got to speak up. What's up?
Sorry about that. So yeah, just a quick clarification as to how like React works. Kind of, basically, it has like this kind of like middle type of DOM, right?
Yep.
That will render itself into various different pages, kind of.
Yep.
So is it kind of like what's like basically like there's a middle template and then they use that template out in different pages, correct?
Close. I mean, the one thing I would distinguish is, when you think of template, you think of handlebars, right? And you think of handlebars injecting. The difference is React allows much more nuanced control. So in addition to just, okay, grab the data, spit it back out with data into the DOM, React allows you to say things like, when this event takes place, trigger these 19 changes to, well, like you could say like register the changes and then hold those changes for a few seconds and then register to the DOM. So I'm trying to think of a better way of putting it because in this example, it feels the same.
It's useful to consider the fact that
Christian,
React,
please.
whereas with one primary advantage to React that is a little bit distinct as to what handlebars and other templating engines do, or a distinction to make between React and templating engines in general, is that templating engines are, in some sense, very active ways to make changes to the template, right? So any change you make to the template will be rendered, even if there's no actual visual change. React is intelligent in the sense that it actually registers. It will only make changes that are actually perceivable, so to speak. So it's a high efficiency way to make changes to almost any conceivable underlying view layer that filters out any invisible changes that would otherwise take place, which is kind of cool and highly efficient.
Yeah, that was pretty much the exact point I was going to bring up. Like JavaScript's really fast, but writing to the DOM is really the slowest thing you can do with it. So by writing to the virtual DOM first, React compares that virtual DOM to the actual real DOM, and it only changes what it needs to. So it makes the minimum smallest amount of changes that it possibly needs to put whatever you're putting on the page.
I think one reason that it's hard to grasp this concept is the reality of what you did in the bootcamp. There was no change in which you were making to the DOM that made it feel laggy, right? But I can assure you that there are many instances in which applications are writing to the DOM that feel very slow. And I'll show you guys one off of an application we're using that is really great, and yet it has one limitation, and that is that writing to the DOM is the real slow point. So this application allows us to build dashboards. We track how students are doing across the country, and we just kind of look at who needs help and how we can help them. And what it's going to do is it's going to write out every single row and column. Let me kind of pull this up. It prints out the table of records for how students are feeling across the program. The reason we only show 25 records is because if we try to load 100 of these, you start to feel the slow pace. Every one of these records has to be pulled from a database and everyone has to be written to the page. Using something like React would actually be very helpful in the cases where you're rerunning something and nothing is changing. For me, honestly, though, the way I started to understand it, though, is when I started to understand React Native, and I understood that virtual DOM was an API effectively. So, all right. Great question, though. Moving in, we'll skip through the docs and we'll go into the second PowerPoint, which is really where we talked about the meat and bones of React's components. All right. So I'm going to skip through some of these refresher questions and go straight into the pieces that I think are hardest to understand. So we'll start with component architecting. You know, the example that we were kind of intending to build in class, I'm not sure. Yeah, please, what's up?
I'm sorry. You're skipping through these things. The class we were supposed to have on this was like 5 weeks ago. And when it was snowed out. So, I mean, I don't need you to spend a ton of time on it, but if you can just like give it a little lip service and brush the cobwebs out, I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's very helpful context. I just didn't want to bore you guys. All right, great. So we'll go over this class for sure then. So we're going to start by talking about components. And the first question that's important to understand is what makes React distinct is that it uses components as a way of organizing content. Typically, when we talk about websites, up until the point of talking about React, we emphasize the idea of separating layout and logic. You had your HTML and your CSS in one page, you had your JavaScript in another page, and that was supposedly a very fantastic thing. That said, React actually flips that idea on its head and instead says, no, if you're creating a messenger box or you're creating a box for calculating the weather, maybe you actually want the layout and the logic to all be bundled in one place. It allows you to sort of build out the complete functionality in one spot and then reuse that code in different pieces of the web application. So when we talk about components, again, it's this idea of bundling, layout, and logic. And if there's one thing you take away from the idea of React and Angular 2 when you're asked about it in interviews is that components are the heart of this sort of framework. And specifically, that components are reusable blocks of code that makes for easier testing and for sort of better structure with a larger application. Cool. So the syntax bit is one that we'll show more of when we talk about the code. But when we create a new component, and we taught this with ES5, sort of in keeping with the same style that you guys had been using in class, we effectively use the code react.createClass. And everything inside of that is going to be considered a component that can be exported and dropped into place in our web application. Cool. The second thing that comes out is how do we render our components, and then we're using the specific method react-dom.render. Now, this is one of those things that gets easily confused is just because we create a component doesn't mean it actually gets displayed. Creating a component is almost like creating it in the world of Ether, and then when we actually render it is when it starts to appear on the page. Okay. So, every component must contain which method? It must contain a render method. And so what do I mean by that? So every component itself will render HTML, CSS, and HTML and JavaScript. That's what actually describes what the component will look like. So when you kind of think of this, let me kind of draw this out so we're all on the same page. So, you know, you've got a component, and the component itself has a render function, right? That's going to describe what the component looks like. Now, if I wanted to use this component, which we'll call Ahmed, the Ahmed component, in my main sort of React app, I am going to use react-dom.render, and I'm going to specify that I want to render Ahmed. And this is like roughly speaking. So this is my main app, and I'm saying render this component, and the component itself describes how to render the Ahmed component. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
If you are aggressively nodding, you're going to have to say yes. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right. So moving in, the next thing we talk about is how do we deploy a component, and that's specify the component's name in angle brackets. Another way of looking at this is that in React, we are effectively creating HTML tags. When we say the tag, for instance, you know, whoa. when we say the tag body, right? This means something to HTML, right? Like if I say body paragraph Ahmed, this means this is a paragraph tag. Now, if I create a component called Ahmed, this doesn't mean anything because HTML has no context for understanding what Ahmed in angle brackets means. But with React, we're almost creating an Ahmed tag that we can then dump into place in React. So Ahmed's tag could be something that had, I don't know, like my face, you know, and every time you clicked on it, it spun around or something, or it gave a motivational quote or something like that, right? All of that logic would be bundled up into Ahmed. Cool. So how do we deploy a component inside of another component? Well, we would put the parent component on the outside, and then we would nest the component on the inside. So what would that mean? As a perfect example of that, let's say we had, you know, the Ahmed component, and I had a mouth, and I had eyes, and this component was like a feed component, right? This is a weird example. But I could essentially embed the feed component inside of the Ahmed component. So let's say that there was a button, and that whenever you push the button, Ahmed would say something, and then whenever you push a different button, you could add a new quote into the feed component. I don't know. The basic gist of it, though, is, again, thinking of ideas of saying that each of these are complex applications, and then inside of that, there may be functionality that's a subcomponent of that. All right. Questions so far? Is this helpful? I don't know, especially for you guys who were rained, who had the weather situation. Aggressively nodding is great.
I'm finding it helpful so far.
Okay, wonderful. All right, great. All right, moving on. Let's talk about JSX gotchas. So one thing I kind of glossed over is the fact that really part of the power of our ability to write React is that we use JSX. JSX allows us to kind of infuse HTML inside of JavaScript. This is the opposite of what we did in jQuery. In jQuery, we wrote HTML and then we embedded JavaScript inside. So it's almost like our base was the HTML content, and then we were injecting little bits of pieces of JavaScript in there. With React, with JSX, we flip that. Instead, we are writing mainly in JavaScript, and we are injecting pieces of HTML in it. The idea here is that JavaScript is the more powerful language, so it's actually the base of what you create. So a couple of JSX gotchas. For one thing that's trips people up very quickly is, you're trying to render HTML, and you have all this beautiful Bootstrap code, but it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is the word class is actually a reserved keyword in JavaScript, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the examples. So you have to change the word class to class name. That's specific to JSX. The second is whenever you incorporate CSS, you can't just specify the sort of style. You need to, an example is, if you have the word font dash size, you need to make it into one word, again, because JavaScript doesn't handle that hyphen very well. So talking about component architectures. Another thing that's really challenging in working with React is knowing which components are subcomponents of which. And really you have a little bit of latitude. So let's say we were building an application like, let me pull it up. All right, let me just figure out this example real quick. Let's say we had this homework example, which I know my class didn't get a chance to do because of the weather. Oh, it's not going to work. Let's see if the graph one does work. Oh, great. Perfect. It's right here. So let's say we had this application and we've got a search box. We've got the number of records to retrieve and we've got results. There are different ways to organize your understanding of this. But one easy way to say this would be to say that this search box is a component, the results is going to be a component, and the overall app is going to be a component. You could also make header a component as well if the header actually had some interactivity. If it doesn't, then you can just have it all be one component. So to kind of go through that example, we had the overall box. I then had a query and a results box, and I actually put those two components inside of their own component called search and header. But more likely, the header, since it doesn't change, is actually going to be called main. Main has a search component, and inside of that's a query and results. And we'll talk about this example specifically. Or actually, I actually have a pretty good video that shows how to build the majority of this application that I can share with you guys as well. It kind of shows it to you over the course of a 2-hour build. Okay.
Wait, Ahmed, real quick on that example.
Yeah.
Is there a specific advantage to having those two components inside Search.js?
Great question. Very good question. And this is something we talked about extensively during the build. The one thing that's going to come out of this question about in React, how do you have data communicate between components, right? So if query and results are not inside of search.js, they're actually kind of brother and sister components. They're at the same level. And unless you incorporate something like Redux or something that allows you to kind of communicate across components, you're not going to be able to transfer data between the two. So what you do is you incorporate them inside of a parent, and the parent. Let me give you a perfect example.
I get that part. I'm just curious as to why you can't put it into main.js and have that as the parent.
I see. It's mainly for cleanliness. I see what you're saying. That's mainly cleanliness.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like mainly so that your aesthetics don't get in the way of like the search of the articles. But again, that's up to you as well. Good call.
But that won't affect the efficiency, right? Like, because React's smart.
It won't affect the efficiency. Okay. It's less about it's more about organization and maintainability.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. Cool. So states and props. So if I were to say that what the cornerstones of React are, I would say that there's 3 things. It's 1, the fact that it's component based. 2, that it uses states and props. And 3, lifecycle events, which we didn't really cover that heavily in the presentation itself, but those are the three pieces. So let's get into states and props. So before I kind of do it, I want to ask a quick question and see where you guys are in terms of your understanding. Sunny, are you there? Sunny, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Question for you. So what is a state and what is a prop? I'm going to pretend it's audio issues. So I'm going to move on to I'm going to move on to Tom Thompson.
All right.
Oh, you. Hey again. Actually, sorry, I didn't know that was you, so I'm not going to call on you twice. I'll actually go to Matthew Mendoza. What is a state and what is a prop? All right, let's go to Tatiana in my class. I definitely know you know this answer.
A prop is passed into the parent component.
Close. I want you to actually answer it even higher level than that. What is a state and prop in terms of what are they? Tatiana, is that you?
Oh, hold on.
Okay, cool. Whew, technical difficulties left and right. All right, let me get into the answer then. States and props are our way of sort of like the equivalent of variables in React. They're our way of transferring data between components. Cool. And then we're going to get right into describing the differences. So Sunny, I see that you go for it. Go for the example. So cool. So the difference between the two of them is, we'll kind of get into the difference for in a second, but the starting point is parents pass data in the form of states and props or methods to their children. Okay, so this is considering parents and children being components, and we'll get right at the difference of it. So a parent, whenever they pass data to their child component, it's passed in the form of a prop. So, and this prop will be received and the form syntax of this.props.prop name. See, let me see if you guys have a question. Okay, cool. So that's the first takeaway. Data is being transferred from parents to children, and those are in the form of props and props, parents from children. And then a state is what's a mutable or a changeable form of data. Whereas a prop is immutable, doesn't change, and that states can be changed using this.setState, and that props are static. So let me kind of describe this in a little bit better context. A parent has a set of variables associated with it. Those are kind of like properties, but they are states. A parent or a component has the ability to change its own state variables, and it can then pass any variables it likes to its children components. A child, upon receiving those state variables, actually receives them as properties, meaning they cannot change their parents' state variables. They can only change their own. So anything that comes in the chat, I can't quite see. Okay, cool.
We're good there.
Okay, great. So, all right. So the main takeaway in describing all of this is React has a strong preference for passing state from parents to children. And the implication of this is what's called unidirectional data flow. So data is being transferred from a parent, which is kind of like the command center of the application or the sub-command centers, and they're passing it down to the children, and the children are just changing it in a local context, but can't change it upwards. So as an example, let's say a parent has a set of children and grandchildren components. If a grandchild changes its color, the parent's like, oh, cool, my grandchild has changed its color. I'll only let the others know if needed. So the main takeaway from this is child A, grandchild A, child B, grandchild B, grandchild B, all these other guys are not aware of that local change unless it needs to be communicated from the parent. So going into Facebook as an example, knowing nothing about how Facebook is organizing its overall flow, let's say that this post is a component, right? And let's say my news feed itself is a component. When I post something here, right, I don't know if you guys use Facebook or not, you might see an article pop up on my news feed. So in a way, this component is influencing what happens in this component. But when I make a post, it most likely isn't going to change any of the sidebar components, any of the rightmost components. In a way, it's an irrelevant change in that direction. So the information is only going to be communicated to the parents that are relevant to it. All right. Now, the main reason for this unidirectional flow is to increase the manageability of changes in the UI. The reason for this is very kind of critical, and this is really why React was created the way it was. If you have a situation in which multiple events can trigger changes on the DOM, it can be extremely hard to debug which event is triggering what reaction on the DOM. As an example, when you kind of watch some of the Facebook videos on React, they specifically mention the example of Facebook Messenger. And Facebook Messenger would randomly hang, it would randomly crash, and it was really hard for them to debug because there were a million things that were possibly leading to influences on that Messenger screen. By changing things to a more component-based and a more like unidirectional flow, you had the ability to control what is tampering with any given element on the screen. Questions about this? And this is like I would say this again. This is not something that you think about picking up just because you want to build something quick. It's really intended as a tool for building more organized and more complex applications. But questions about this conceptually? All right, you guys still with me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, then. So let's get into the code and we'll kind of look at some code and we'll talk about it as we go along. All right. We're going to get started by introducing the setup of React, which I know even in my own class we ran into a lot of issues with Webpack and compile and running the installers and whatnot. All right. So first things first, in case you guys didn't get this stuff set up, we're going to install a package you may or may not have. So in Sublime, you're going to want to do Command-Shift-P, install a package, and then you would want to install Babel, which I already have. And Babel is sort of like our converter. It allows us to write code in JSX and then convert that code into plain vanilla JavaScript for the browser to read. Because right now, our browsers cannot read JSX. Okay. The next thing you're going to want to do when you're writing React code is you're going to want to go in, especially if you're using Sublime, is go into Edit, or I guess I'm now used to using Windows code.
Windows code.
What is it called? Windows code?
Visual Studio Code.
Visual Studio
VS Code.
All right, so the place you're going to go to is View, Syntax, Open All with Current Extension, change it to Babel, and then JavaScript. So this is going to say that no matter what JavaScript I've got, open it up with Babel so that it will do a conversion. Okay? Wonderful. All right. Once that's set up, we are doing some great work. The next thing we're going to want to do is run npm install -g or webpack -g. And webpack is what's going to be our actual compiler. It's going to be, when we get into it, what we use to compile our JavaScript code into our JSX code into compiled JavaScript according to Babel's specifications. Okay, so I'm going to assume you guys have this stuff set up. If you don't, go ahead and you're interested in trying to get this set up, then message in the chat box, and Christian and Paleki are clearly available for answering questions there. Great. So we are doing great work here. All right. Let's go through and we'll start from the top, and we're going to go through the examples we talked about in class. And if anybody needs anything re-explained, or maybe we have some time for some live coding, we will towards the end. But I want to go through these kind of systematically. Cool. All right, great. Let's start off with the very first example, which is Hello React. So Hello React is fairly simple. It is our first example in which we create anything that is viewable, and all it will do is the following. I wish I could just get rid of all these things that are on my screen. Driving me crazy. All this one does is it prints the word hello world.
We don't see any of the things you're talking about.
All these like Zoom like plugins and things, it's just like they keep moving around.
Yeah, like I know what you're talking about, but
it's so annoying. Okay. All right. Let's get into it. So hello React. If you are you hey, by the way, quick question. Do you guys have your repos available to follow along in the code as I open things up?
Yes.
Okay, great. I would encourage you guys to do that. That way you can kind of poke holes or ask questions as we go through it. All right, so we'll start off with this Hello React. The first file to pay attention to is our one of two files. It could be package.json or webpack.config. I'll be honest, for every React project that I create, I honestly copy and paste these same files over and over again, but we'll kind of talk about what's in here. So in our package.json, we specify the core React packages we need, which are React and React DOM. React is what's going to give us the ability to use all of React's methods. React DOM is what we actually render using. And then we have a set of dev dependencies, which we use to convert the JSX using Babel and Webpack. Okay. The next file worth looking at is webpack.config. And webpack.config is what's telling Webpack how we want the conversion to take place. So we're going to say that we're starting by Webpack looking at this file, app.js, and it's going to output the plain compiled JavaScript, so the vanilla JavaScript, into the bundle.js file. And we're going to be using these rules to do the compilation. One thing I will throw out there, a lot of you guys, at least in my class, try to do things with the like React, sort of like templated projects, I guess like startup builders or whatever. I don't know, what do you call these things? But one of the things that quickly people realize is if you don't have an understanding as to how the compilers work and like how to get things set up, it can be more challenging to maintain like a boilerplate code that you don't understand than it is to just start with what's simple. And so for that purpose, I would say our Webpack files are pretty useful. All right. So we've talked about the Webpack file, we talked about package. The next thing we go into is index.html. And the first thing to kind of know about a React application is React does not have to be your entire application. It could be something in which you have an entire, HTML, CSS, all made in all kinds of places, and you just want one piece of it to be in React. So as an example here, hello, I am not React. Me neither. So like right now, I've actually created a React application that has non-React stuff above and below. It's just hello world that is being created using React. And we'll kind of get into how that is. Okay. So I have my HTML page and I have a specific div called app for which my content is going to be rendered using React. So if I now go into app.js, this is where our first block of React code comes in. React begins by incorporating the React library as well as the React DOM library. And all we're doing here is we're saying use the React DOM render method to render this paragraph tag into the the app div specified. Oh no, I hit bundle. Oh, always painful whenever you do that. Ooh. Always painful. Oh, it's gonna take forever. Any questions while we wait? Oh, perfect. Let's stop it.
Yeah, I had a question about the non-React stuff.
Yeah, what's up?
So you have hello, I'm not React, right? There's the
Yep.
H1 tag. Is that okay to do, or is that like really bad practice?
No, it's totally good practice. I mean, that was one of the things that I encourage people to do for their final project was just make a single React component. Everything else is non-React. So as a really good example of this, even if we had taken the NYT article search app, right? You could make the entire app such that everything is non-React except for the search and the results, and that's it. And just dump that. Cool. Like one thing I would encourage you to do is maybe create an application when you're all said and done with everything, and you make one component in React, just enough to talk about it during interviews. Be like, I made an application. It had a React component. And that's a sign that you know what you're talking about at a basic level. All right. So this app right here is where the contents from this app.js, when it gets rendered, will get dumped to. And again, in this example, we are not creating a single component. We are literally just using React's render function to render a paragraph, which is a kind of component, into that div. Questions about this? All right. Let me also show you guys to make sure we're on the same page.
I have a question though.
Please.
The one you are telling Tom about, that you can have the example that you showed, that you can have both.
Yeah.
And you could have used it for the project you did.
Yeah.
So how do we make it communicate between those two components also? Like the search and the result?
So if you were to make that search and articles, let me give you an example. So I might have to kind of tweak things a little bit more than I want to here. But let's say you would have to make search and articles both components within another component. So the difference is instead of rendering paragraph, you would render the search component. Inside of search, there would be the two.
Okay, thank you.
Great. You guys are asking good questions. Clearly, y'all know what you're talking about. Let me just make sure we're on the same page in terms of how to run this thing. I hope if it takes too long, I won't try to run these because I've definitely recall my class. It took forever to. No. What's it doing? Okay, I'm installing Webpack, I guess.
Yo, yarn install.
Is it faster? Do you find it to be better?
Yeah. It'll even install Webpack if like you're offline if you've done it before.
How do I install yarn?
npm install -g yarn.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh.
This will be the last like slow npm download.
From this point forward, I just do dang it. I do yarn install.
You do yarn add, and if you do yarn add, it'll automatically save it to your dev dependencies.
Wow.
If you do yarn -- dev add, it'll add it to dev dependencies.
All right, he's gonna have to remind me of that. That's cool.
Oh well, we're using it in the data viz repo now, so you'll figure it out.
All right. All right, cool. So I'm in, and all right. So you're telling me I should be able to run yarn add. How do I run this package of JSON thing? Yarn what? Christian, I can't hear you.
Sorry. What's the script in the package.json? Build, I guess. Yarn build.
Oh, it's yarn build. Okay, cool.
Yep.
And then how do I do? What's the equivalent of npm install in yarn?
Yarn add. Or if you're installing from like the package.json, then it's yarn install.
So the difference you're telling me though is that by running yarn install, it will save everything in.
It'll like cache things for a while. So like there are going to be times where like it'll download things, but it's not really downloading things. It's just grabbing it from your cache.
So across projects.
Yep.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
All right. That's a great takeaway for people in my class. Yarn it up.
Yeah, I'm gonna send a link.
All right. So yarn has been that was fast though. Yarn install that did run fast. All right.
Yeah.
And then you're telling me yarn build.
Yep. It's the same thing as npm run build.
Ooh, oh, that's cool. Okay. Cool. All right. Wow, that's neat. Very cool. So even if you don't run yarn, build, you can also run webpack-w, which is equivalently what build does right here because it says build is webpack. Cool. I totally didn't know that about the yarn. So again, guys, that was the takeaway from this was just to say that we installed our packages and then we ran webpack, which did the conversion and then, converted the bundle file, which our index.js is index.html is reading. All right. Y'all following along? You guys doing okay?
Oh, yes.
All right. Thanks. Thank you, Tamer.
You're welcome, sir. I got you.
All right. We're moving onward. So we're still in non-component land, and we're going to stay in non-component land for a little bit. The next thing we're going to do is instead of rendering a paragraph, in this example, we are going to render an entire div. So when I mean that we're going to open this in browser. And you guys can see that here it says, hey guys, I'm a header, things I like, blah, 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 right? All of that gets rendered inside of the app. And if I go inside of app.js, you can see that all of this content right here was rendered here. The key thing though to notice is in rendering them, you actually have to specify all of the contents within one div. A very common mistake when you're first learning React is to want to do this. And it won't work because this is not all encapsulated in a single div. It's almost like the render function is only looking for a single thing to render. So that won't work. Okay. So the only takeaway from this example is, you can put as much stuff inside of these divs as you want. All right. The next example is one that I think is more useful, which is, okay, now if we wanted to build an application that incorporated Bootstrap, how would we do that? So here, we have a fully decked out Bootstrap layout, all of which relies on React. And really, this is actually kind of a deceivingly simple solution in that we incorporated the Bootstrap CDN at the top of our index page, and our React application just utilizes all of the Bootstrap classes. So this is a Bootstrap layout rendered, and we are specifying class name. We are specifying class name where we would typically specify class. but all this content, once it gets rendered, will automatically be picked up by the CSS. Okay. Questions about that example? All right, cool. We still got 19 people? That's good. All right, cool. Forging along, and now moving into JSX. So,
just have a quick question, Ahmed.
What's up, Han?
Just wondering if anybody knows of a tool that makes writing JSX less painful. Like, for example, in Sublime, if you're writing out HTML and CSS, it's got a lot of autocomplete kind of stuff. But when I'm doing JSX, it seems like
that's a good question. So you're basically saying like H2 tab, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Blakey, Christian, you guys know? Tamer?
For VS Code, I haven't found anything great, honestly. But I mean,
Sublime?
there should be like a bunch of like snippets that snippet packages where like you'll start typing a component and you'll see the autocomplete to like complete it. Yeah, I don't know.
Ah, dang it. I saw something I didn't.
You could probably use Emmet.
Yeah, I was gonna say supposedly you can make Emmet do JSX.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you use Emmet before, Han, but it's basically like a shorthand.
That's what what he's asking though.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Look,
sorry, I didn't hear the word.
So like, look, I'm inside of a JavaScript file and I want to be like kaboom, and I can't do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
There also might be like a setting for Emmet to like just allow it to work in JavaScript files, but that might get annoying outside of React.
That's a good point.
Oh, here, check this out.
Keep
I
this.
didn't read it, but it looks really good.
All right, there you go. Good question, Han.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So we're getting into it. Now we're talking about JSX variables, and this is where the magic starts to appear. And I'll show you what this example does. I'm going to open this in browser, and you guys can see my name is the JSX boss. I can generate random numbers, and I can even reverse my own name. And I can refresh this, and then see random numbers generated. All right. Now, the cool thing here is that in our app.js file, where we're rendering content, inside of it, somebody's like,
sorry.
Oh, it's Tamer. All right. So inside of here, we can put these sort of curly braces, and inside of that, we can just put as much JavaScript as we want. So here, when it comes to generating random numbers, we're generating a random number between 1 and 9. We are reversing a name, reversing the name, because we actually said my name is specified up here in terms of variables, and we included that there. So let's do a quick challenge. Let's say I wanted to print my address, or a fake address, right? So I can put state equals to Texas, var city equals to College Station. I can't even think of an address. I'm just gonna give you my actual home address.
What's your social?
Yeah, right. Let's just keep going. All right. Let's say I wanted to print my address, right? I could do that right here, and I could say, here is my address, and I could put inside of here state and plus to this city plus let's not put the address, let's put city and state. And so now what we're doing is we're actually using a plain JavaScript string combination, but inside of an HTML. That's kind of useful. Let's run this code.
Not gonna work.
Not gonna work? Thanks, man. What did I mess up?
I don't know. What did guys? What did Ahmed miss?
Yeah, what did he miss?
Closing tag.
Yep.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Oh, great catch, guys. Christian is
TAs.
Eyes of an eagle.
Thanks, man. All right, cool. Let's keep going then. Let me see where I'm at. It's going to take too long. Let's do this. So I will say, even of myself, for those of you who did attend my React Live build, I find coding in React just to be like slower because I'm like compiling and I'm running things. It might just be that I'm like not, you know, as fluent in it. But if that's how it feels, you shouldn't, you know, be hard on yourself. Okay. Yarn install. I don't know. Doesn't feel that fast, man.
I mean, you're also at the New York office, which always has terrible Wi-Fi, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I don't know. I think no. I think it's the same speed to me. All right. Ooh, I'm getting a lot of messages.
So every time you make a change, you need to rerun this?
Not npm install, because you will have the packages, right?
Right.
The only thing you'll have to run is yarn build, or equivalently webpack-w, which is not as slow. That should be pretty fast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's for me. I don't have any of these packages installed on this in this folder. So now let's rerun this. Let's open this folder. And what you should see is, here's my address, College Station, Texas. And again, the cool thing here was we just incorporated variables like no big deal. Right? Like this on and of itself could be cool. Like take aside the fact that you want components or whatever. But if you were to build Hangman, imagine building it where you could just throw in variables into the HTML without having to inject it into the DOM. That's kind of useful. All right. Cool. Let's keep going. So the next thing is another example of this that we did in class was incorporating moment. So in addition to being able to incorporate plain variables, we can incorporate NPM libraries or NPM packages into our projects as well. Christian, Tamer, Paleki, I don't know if Paleki, you're still there, but when I say NPM packages, there's limits, right? Like only certain NPM packages will work, or the vast majority, right?
Yeah, I mean, you gotta definitely look hard when you're looking into an NPM package to make sure that you have a lot of people who have used it, a lot of people have verified its actual usability, and that it's not buggy. So there really is only a handful of really good ones and a ton of terrible ones out there. So be wary.
But I guess I mean in the specific context of using it on the front end.
No, oh no, that's fine. Yeah, because you could use anything because what Webpack's gonna do is it's gonna like allow you to like require and export everything. I mean, I guess you can't do anything that needs like FS like under the hood.
That's what I mean. There's clearly going to be like.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
Not going to work. But totally right. The cool thing is like packages like Moment are going to work. Packages like the weather package that we've used sometimes in the past is going to work. So in this example, we require the Moment library, and then we use the Moment library to do a conversion of this date into a Moment format, and then we like did calculations with it. Okay. So I'll show you what this one looks like. Cool. So this is using Moment, and it was able to calculate the age. Cool. Yeah, Express would be an example of a package that would not make much sense in this context. Cool. All right. How is this going, guys? Especially for those of you who this is a review for.
I'm with you.
All right. Cool. Hoping this is helpful.
Just in terms of packages that you like know that will work, I guess it's just stuff that manipulates like the DOM that will work. You don't have to worry about like, I guess backend stuff won't really work necessarily.
No, that's not true. I mean, the backend stuff will mostly work. Like server side stuff won't work. But if I was looking up like,
I would say pretty much every front end library that you've ever used that you've included with the CDN, you can now npm install and use with your React code.
And then some. I mean, there were a lot of things that from the CDN side, there was no CDN package for. Yeah. But like, I'll give you a perfect example. Twitter's npm package. That's going to work amazingly well. And that, I mean, there wasn't like a CDN for it. So yeah, I would encourage you to try it and then see if it doesn't work. Like,
Yeah, because I think I tried using request once and I don't think it worked.
request doesn't, maybe so. That's interesting.
I think that's why they had Axios as an
yeah,
example.
yeah, that's actually interesting. We request. I don't remember request not working, but I do remember most of the libraries use Axios. Fascinating. Let me check something real quick. Request.
I was just wondering if there's like a way to know ahead of time before
Yeah,
downloading.
I'm looking at it. The one thing I would be curious about was I look at the request versus the Axios library, and one thing I just noticed was Axios explicitly mentioned promise-based HTTP client for the browser and Node.js. So, but that's a great question. I actually don't know off the top of my head how you would know if request won't work. Good question. I mean, we can kind of dig in a little bit. I don't know. Let's wait for that to load and then come back to it. Cool. Moving on. Fetch. Looks like you can use it though. I don't know. Maybe this didn't work for you, but it looks like you can. All right. So hopefully we're getting the gist of it. This JSX stuff is maybe, as powerful as like, I think oftentimes you're trying to bite the bullet of trying to learn React. You try to bite everything at once, but just learning how to use JSX efficiently is one of those cool, neat things that you get out of having to learn React. Now let's move into the meat and bones of what we're doing, which is components. So up until now, just for context, we've been dumping divs into our render function and then displaying that. What we're going to do now is something a little bit different. We're going to render a pre-made component into the render function. So how does that work? We'll go into app this time around, and you'll see that we are doing the same just that we've typically been doing, except in this example, we are rendering a header component. And the header component is something that we ourselves have made. So I'm going to go into header.js. And you can see here that there is a header component created. And the header component, as I mentioned before when I was kind of trying to draw this out, the component itself has a render function. And then React DOM renders the subcomponent using its subcomponent, using its render function. So again, it's like saying, if you imagine app.js as being like the factory that produces the content to the screen, the render function is saying, here are the instructions on how to display it. And then it's going to go to the header and use the header's render function to determine what is displayed inside. Cool. Great. So the other thing that's important to notice about this example is module.exports, which is saying, take this this header function and then make it available for import into header. A very common mistake is to not incorporate this line. That's why I mentioned it. And then everything else is the same. Index is just going to display index is the app, and then the bundle.js, and then package and webpack are the same. All right, so in this example, if I run it just to show, this I'm a header was created from I'm a header's component and then dumped into app. So we can now take this to the next level by doing a multiple component example. So here in this example, we've got 3 components, a header, a result, and a search, all of which are going to be rendered inside of app. The only way we can do that is if we have app. App has a main div, and inside of that, there's header, results, and search. Again, you can't try to render these 3 things like this because there's no single entry point for React to render. So it needs to have one major div, and everything else needs to be contained. So if I run this example, it looks like I'm a header, I'm the results component, I'm the search component, and that comes from I'm a header, I'm the results component, I'm the search component. Questions about this example?
No, we're good.
All right, cool. Hopefully this is good. All right, great. Moving on to the bonus example, which let me see what that was. I don't remember. I think the bonus example is just with bootstraps. Let's run this one. Yeah, so the bonus example was a full-blown design that has a navbar, jumbotron, and a panel. And it's really not too complicated. Here we've got our bootstrap CSS, and each of the subcomponents incorporates the div, specifies the bootstrap class name, except it uses the word class name instead of class. Same thing here for the navbar, and same thing here for the panel. And it has, again, panel default. And then when it gets rendered, it just renders a navbar, jumbotron, and panel. So the cool thing here is an example is, let's say I wanted to render 5 jumbotrons for some reason. I'm going to have to re-render this thing. I would rerun this code. Okay, Christian, that was pretty fast.
Yeah, I don't know. It felt like it was.
It feels like it might just be a psychological benefit, but I do like that I can see the bars.
Yeah.
All right, let's wait for it. But
why is that not going to work?
This is not going to work?
No.
Oh,
The capital U.
Thank you.
You saw it, you didn't say anything.
Yarn build. Christian's good. He's got, all right. Let's see. So now I have 2 jumbotrons, right? And imagine again, if these jumbotrons had like some slamming complex logic, being able to just create a second one like that, that would be amazing, right? Without having to copy and paste a ton of code, that's amazing. Or better yet, I mean, let's say we had another panel. Let's slam it. Look at that. 5 panels and like 4 lines of code. That's amazing. Again, one thing that'll kind of come into this example in particular is if we wanted to change the body content, then we might make something where we pass in, for instance, a property or a state, such that each of these panels was rendered with different content. But it's a different way to think about how you create content. All right. So that was the first day of React, and we've covered a lot. Actually, this is a good amount of material that gives you a really good foundation. The next thing I wanted to cover was states and props, and this is really kind of the hairier part, and we'll kind of go from there. So questions about any of this stuff? All right, good. That's cool. All right, you guys want to keep going?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, then. Let's go on to props and states, and then we will probably close it at that point so that you guys, then I would basically point you guys to watch the video on NYT so that the next class you have a good foundation for React Native. All right, so let's start off by talking about props and states. So in this example, we have Bob and Bob the second. I can't believe this is the first example in this. This is a cool one. I remember. All right, so we got Bob and Bob the second. So Bob here these are his properties, and this is his photo, and this is Bob the second. Bob the second is actually inheriting different values based on the parent. So as an example of what I mean by that. So here, I believe Bob's the second's age was like divided by 8. But we could change the numbers around in different ways. So I'll show you what I mean by that. Again, let's just kind of make sure we're on the same page. Index is the exact same as everything we're doing. Package is the same. Webpack is the same. App is also the same, except it renders the main component. The main component has a bunch of code in it that looks kind of scary, but it's not too bad. That starts off with the following way. It creates a component called main, and it has a initial state. The initial state is kind of the way of saying these are the variables or data, sort of data associated with this component. So it has a name, it has an age, an artistry value, an is fuzzy value, and an image value that are then used in the render. So we're going to, instead of, if we wanted to render the name, we use this.state.name, and that again specifies this. Now, important question that comes into mind that probably comes to mind is why would we do this instead of doing, say, var name equals to Bob, and then just doing, you know, name? Anyone have any ideas?
It'll be harder to manage all the different elements if they're all separate. So having an object makes your life easier.
Yeah, I mean, passing these things around gets really messy. Like, let's say, for an example, I'll give you a perfect example. Let's say, I keep coming up with weird examples. Let's say we had another component called Bob's wife, and Bob's wife had the ability to smack the artistry out of Bob, all right? And whenever that happened, it then influenced the child's skills as well, right? If we were relying on this as being just a plain variable instead of a state, right? We would have to track, we wouldn't necessarily have an easy way to change what was happening with Bob himself to then get passed down to the child. By having state variables, you can kind of build a chain in which one component impacts another component, and that immediately gets passed down to the child and keeps everything running almost live.
I have another reason, which
go for it, please.
Maybe it'll be confusing. I don't know, but I'll give it a shot anyway. So if we had like Bob, or Bob's name up there defined as a variable, and we needed to render multiple main components, because like occasionally, like you might have to like render multiple of the same component. You're on Facebook, your news feed has like multiple like feed items. If we were referencing that variable from like outside, then every single one of those components would be talking about the same name variable. And that's just because like a component is like basically like an object which has like functions inside, and it's like, so for each like individual like main to have its own like unique state that doesn't mess with anybody else's like state, we put it inside that component rather than like reference it outside as a variable.
Christian, that was a great example. That was actually a better example. That's exactly what it's for. Yeah, great example. Because another way to think of this is, instead of making this be Bob, right? Imagine if each of these things was a character, and a character had their own properties that got created or instantiated at some point. That was a good example. Cool. All right, but getting into it, we've got these state variables, and they're all being used throughout to describe Bob's name, his property, his age, his fuzziness, and his artistry level, as well as an image. And then Bob creates a child component inside of it himself. And the child is passed these state variables to the child. So this is a very important point. I'm going to go ahead and open up child and show you what I mean. But pay attention. Dad's age is equal to this.state.age. Dad's fuzzy is equal to this.state.isFuzzy. And you can see that the child doesn't have a isFuzzy or isArtistry value of his own. He actually uses this.props.dadsFuzzy, which he inherited from the dad, to determine what his fuzziness value is. So if his dad is fuzzy, he is not. And so as an example of what I mean by that, let me go ahead and show you what happens when I run this.
I'm just like waiting for it to finish in like half a second.
Yeah, right. That would prove it.
Yeah.
I feel like it's faster, but it's taking the same amount of time. That's why I was wondering, does it apply across projects?
It totally should. I'm gonna look into it
Wait,
more.
wait. Did it go faster? Yeah, it did. Last time it went 27 seconds. This time it went 19.
Oh, yeah, that's significantly faster.
All right. Let's see. Webpack-W. Okay. So refresh this thing. Nothing is happening here. But let's say I changed the artistry value for the dad. So I'm going to go into main. Artistry value is going to be 104. Save it. And wait for Webpack to refresh this thing. And you can see that the child's value changed as well because the child directly inherited the parent's value. Cool. Now, one thing that's important to note is the child receives the property not with the same name as the parent. So the parent's age was called this.state.age, but we renamed it to dad's age. So when the child obtained it, it was called this.props.dad's age. On my live video, I remember spending like a good solid 8 or 9 minutes completely confused by this point. Okay. Questions about this example? It's a pretty critical basic example.
Could you go back to main.js?
Yeah, no problem.
Let's see where
Top or bottom?
No, right there. I wanted to see that child's thing. Thank you.
Great. And again, in main also inherits child. That's the only reason that it could access the child component. Other thing to take note of in this example is main used the child component or imported it, but the child had no reason to import main. Like I don't have to say var main equals to, require main, because I'm not actually using the main component in the child. I'm just using the main's, properties. All right, let's keep on going. So this next example was this was a cool one. So this was a cool example in which we talked about whenever I clicked, it impacted the parent, the child, and the grandchild, and the values kept getting flowing down. So here in this example, we have 3 levels: a parent, a child, and a grandchild. The parent example has an initial state called clicks. It has a function for handling clicks and a function for resetting clicks. When it handles the click, it uses the setState method to change this click state to be the previous click state plus 1, and the reset resets it. Okay. The render function basically specifies, gibberish, and then right here, there is an onClick event associated with that button that runs this.handleClick, and it runs this function. So this is actually, plain JavaScript. This is not actually, this is no, it's not plain. This is plain HTML calling this function. So here we're calling the this.handleClick, and it's running this function. And then this one does the reset. The next bit of it is that it incorporates a child component right here. And that child component will have its own sort of changes in values. So here, we're creating the child component, and we're saying, give it the value of clicks that the parent has tracked. So if I go into child receives that click count in the form of a property, multiplies it by 2, and then, passes it to its own child, and its own child takes the value received from it by the parent by its parent child and multiplies it by 4. So to go back to the example, clicking here changes the value of the state in parent, which then gets passed down to child, which then gets multiplied by 4 in the grandchild. So here, I'm going to show you a quick thing of using the React extension. I can actually look at the value of any one of my components during the course of my manipulation. So here, let's say I wanted to know what was the value of grandchild. I can click grandchild and I can see that the value of it is number 10, which is what was inherited by the child. And I can go to child and click on it and notice that the value is 5, which came from the parent. And then the parent had a click state of 5. One thing to know about this extension, which you can download off of Chrome, Chrome is the Chrome extension library, is that you need to turn on one thing that doesn't come on by default. So if I go to extensions and I go to React right here, you need to actually go to turn on allow access to file URLs because we're using a local file system. Questions about this example?
It seems like the props are changing, aren't they?
The props are changing. Yes, the props are going to change. Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
We're never actually modifying props directly, though.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, the props are being replaced each time by the new prop, by the new state value.
Yeah. So anytime you have like the JSX brackets there, that has to be like an expression. It has to be like some kind of statement that returns a value. So what's happening is it's basically giving back whatever this dot props that number is times 4. It's not actually assigning anything or changing anything.
No, I see.
Great call, Christian. Thank you.
Hmm?
All right, moving on. So that kind of got us to the crazy click counter. The crazy click counter was a cool example that showed you a couple of things. What this example shows is one where you click, and then it changes the numbers. So it adds here, multiplies here, and randomly selects, and it also changes to a random image each time we click. Right? This is kind of where we start to get into the idea that, look, these components can do crazy things in response to other events, and they don't actually have to be tied. So I'll go into showing you what I mean by that here. So we have here main, and our main component is the whole application, which has a subcomponent of adder, multiplier, randomizer, and imager. The click handler exists inside of the main component. So main has this initial state of 0. It has a handle click, and it has a function for rendering the contents. And then it has an on-click handler that changes the state variable here. And it also has adder, multiplier, randomizer, and imager all being given the click count. What those components do with the click count is up to them at their discretion. So adder just takes it and prints it. Imager has an array of images and a selection value, and it will randomly select one of these images every single time it receives a new prop. And this is actually a good example where we first introduced the idea of a lifecycle event. Lifecycle events are probably one of the most confusing things about React. But React, again, because it has a virtual DOM, has a way of triggering events in response to changes in data. So here in this example, we're saying if the component ever receives a prop, so if the parent ever gives it a prop, here, then run this block of code. In our case, every time we click, it's going to receive a prop because the parent is going to give it a new value. Okay. And then it's going to render the new image. Now, lifecycle events, I think are made out to be harder than they actually are. You can get really complicated with it. But honestly, there are a few that you're going to continually use. You're going to use components will receive props. You're going to use, let me see if I can pull up a couple. Component will update or component did update. And these are all tied to the idea of saying, is there a change? If there's a change, then trigger an event. If not, don't do something else. They aren't always as intuitive as they sound, but once you figure out what each one does, you will start to use them over and over again. But the difference is, here you can say something along the lines of, is it going to change and did it change? So if, let's say, we were creating some code that triggers many changes on the DOM screen, we can make it such that React will calculate whether or not any variable will change. If it changes, if it is going to change, then it's going to run. Or if it actually completed the change and rendered it to the screen, run. It just, for a lot of the things that we're doing, there's an insignificant difference, but in more complex renderings, these can be a significant difference. Cool. Awesome. Okay. Cool. Great. So that's randomizer. Then we've got multiplier here, which just takes the 2 clicks and multiplies them together, and randomizer, which takes the click count and multiplies it by a random number. Cool. All right. Questions so far? All right. So next up, we're going to talk about the alternative example, which is up until now, everything we've been talking about has been a parent is conversing with its child. So a parent is taking in information and commuting it downstream to its children. But inevitably, there are situations in which a child needs to communicate back to the parent. How do they do that in React? So in React, that happens in the following way. So here in this example, let me kind of show you what's happening. We've got a parent and a child. The child has the click button, and whenever the child is clicked on, it's passing the value back up to the parent. When children rebel. All right. So in this example, parent has a state of click count, and it has the code for handling the rendering of the child, and it displays its click value. Now, the key difference here in this example is the parent has a function that we ourselves have created. This can be called whatever we want, but in our case, we're calling it setParent. And setParent is a function for changing the click counter of itself. What we're going to do is we're going to pass to its child this setParent function. So when we create the setParent function, we're going to say, here, instead of just taking a simple data type, we're going to give you an entire function. You then can use that function to change values, to change me. So it's almost like, the way I would say it is, I did draw this and it was really good in class. Let's see if I can draw it again for y'all. All right, so in this example, the difference here is what's happening is we've got 2 options. So this is parent, and in a traditional flow, parent is giving a child data, gives data, and then it's received as a prop. Okay, that's the classic example we've been talking about up until this example. The example we're talking about this time is a little bit different. So a parent is going to give its child, gives function to change self to the child, right? The child will then utilize that function to change the parent. So here what I mean by that is gives the function, uses function, changes parent. Okay? It's almost like saying the parent is giving the child the key to my heart. You know, it's like, here is the tool that you can use to change me. And that explicitly gives the child permission to do that without giving every other child in the entire application the ability to change it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? Thank you. Thank you, Tatiana. All right, great. Cool. So that's what's happening in this example. The child received that function and then utilized that function inside of its own handle click function to change the parent. And it uses the set parent method given to it by the parent to give it the new number that it's been tracking. Okay. Similarly, when it resets, it uses the this.props.setParent to reset the parent. So the other takeaway from this is a prop doesn't necessarily just have to be a variable. It can also be a complete function. Cool. Wonderful. All right. So let's move on to the more complex example, which was feed me Seymour. So in this example, we had Seymour, and he had 3 different child components, each of which could feed him a different thing. So human flesh is worth 25. Frog liver was worth, I'm trying to do the math, 22? 12, right? Yeah, 12. And then tofu was worth, I think, 6, right? So each of these has their own value that they then contribute to Seymour, who eventually, when he gets full, runs his own block of code that says, you've done well, Seymour is full. So here, we had Seymour, and we have his children. Seymour has an initial state of how much he's consumed. And anytime he is updated, we're going to take in the previous value and the new value, and then we kind of use it to update the state. We'll talk about this in a second. Okay. There is also then a function called feed Seymour, which we will in turn give to each of our children components, which are the foods that he can eat. The children will use that feed Seymour function to pass back the food value that it provides. So here, child 1 is the human flesh. It's worth 25. So whenever it's clicked, it will pass back 25. The frog livers gives back a value of 12. And then organic tofu gives 6, right? Seymour takes in all these values, and it uses the lifecycle event component did update, which says, if I am changed in any way, take my previous prop value and my new state value, and then you can kind of do something with it. So I'll show you what I mean by that. In this case, we're just console logging it. So if I click, it's going to print the previous state and the new state. So previous state. Oh, interesting. Yeah, prev state, and then this.state. We just have to incorporate previous prop because the function actually returns previous prop value as well, but we don't need the previous prop. We just need the previous state. Cool. So here it's saying if the value consumed is not 0, then go ahead and print the value change. And if it's back to 0, we're going to go back to saying Seymour is very full. And if it only ends up being 0 if the consumed amount is over 500. So it's passing more complex bits of code around the parent has their own checks and they pass in different tools to the children as well. I actually think this is a really good example that you know, if you're, you know, you might want to look back into. Cool.
The component did update. Is it called any component is update, or can we just choose if we have more than one variables in the state?
Yeah.
So this will be called every time?
Yeah.
Or?
Anytime there's a change, it's going to be called. So in other examples, I actually have checks inside of here that says, I basically say if component did update, and I say inside of here. Let's say we had let me see if I can get one more state. Nope, I don't have any states in here. Yeah, I do. I have returned, consumed. Let's say I have this, name, Seymour. Let's say you wanted to have code that only ran if Seymour changed, but not the consumed amount. You would do something along the lines of if prev state, if this dot state dot name does not equal to prev state dot name. And then you would run the code inside of here. That's how I've approached it. There may be a more sophisticated way to do this, but I have seen a lot of people online basically recommend this approach. Does that make sense? But that was a really good question.
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Yeah, that honestly, I remember when I was first making the homework assignment, completely confused me. And I remember being like, what? Like, how do I not make it run every time? Because you will easily hit an endless loop with some of these life cycle events. If say one of your state changes another change, this will run like a million times. So I remember, I'll give you just a practical example. For the New York Times example, which I'm not sure if it's functional online, I made it such that whenever you search, it would like, you know, search the New York Times for all the data. For whatever reason, that was triggering componented updates like every time. So I ended up shooting like 10,000 API calls, and I like hit my limit the first time just because I had no check against some of these changes.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So we're doing good. We got 2 more examples, and then I think we'll call it for the day. Okay, great. And Christian here is like knocking him out. Oh dang, is there a good resource on lifecycle events? Because the one on React's website sucks.
Yeah, this one's good because it has like a diagram of like what happens when the state changes, when a prop changes, when it first gets loaded to the page, and when it comes off the page.
That's awesome. Awesome. All right, let's keep going. Form handling. Okay, I might have to answer this real quick. Yeah, all right, 2 more examples. Form handling was the next one. So in this example here, we've got a form, and if I type in, say, oops, 212 and this and that, it just changes immediately very quickly. So let's see how this works. So I mean, not do that. All right, so it has 2 different three input boxes, and let's kind of look at the code. So we've got a component for form, and form has 3 different states, num1, num2, and text, and has a function that we've created called handle change, which I have happily copied off of a Stack Overflow question. Handle change basically compares the value presented by what's in the text box against what's in sort of the state, and then it basically dumps that state into place right here. So we'll kind of get into the code, and in this example, we've got this.state num1, this.state num2 equals to the value of each of these things converted into a number. So important thing here is when this is brought in, it's brought in as a text value. So we actually have to convert it into a number, add them together, and then we'll print it here. And then similarly here, we say this.state.text, and we reverse it. The one thing I think that what happens here is these input boxes each have an onChange event. that triggers the this.handle change, which is described here. And again, this is mainly an example of why Stack Overflow is fantastic. You kind of use code like right here to change these state variables in response to the change events. Cool. Awesome. All right, last example. This is a good one. This one talks about utilizing Axios for the first time to run a search. So in this example, you search for the phrase, say White House, oops, or White House, submit it, and then you've got a search right there. And you can see here that it ran a search and immediately printed it. So in order to do this, we had to use API calls. So we'll start our journey by looking at form. And we see that form is this component right here, this query. And form has an initial state value of term. It has the handle change, which basically registers the change in value. And it has a handle submit, which registers what happens whenever you hit submit, that it's going to change here. And then it has a render function, which is nothing complicated other than to say that this text box is tied to onChange and this button is tied to submit. Okay. All right. So the moment I hit submit, what it does is it sets the value of this state variable to be equal to whatever was registered inside. And then let me double confirm where this search takes place. I think it's in main. Yeah. So I should have stepped back one. Outside of this entire application is one component called main. And yeah, main has a set term function that's passed down to query, and query uses it to change the state of the term that's held in the entire application. And main then passes that term to results. Down here, results takes that term, and results is literally just going to print the address. But how does it get the address? Well, main has a function called componentDid update that calls Axios, or calls the helper. Yeah, that calls a helper function inside for running queries. This is probably the most complicated example, so I might slow down just a bit and kind of contextualize it again. In this example was the first time that we use Axios or Ajax to run a call. Our Axios call is inside of the helpers.js file. We're basically removing that call outside the context of our components because we might use this call in multiple places in our application. So this entire code snippet is basically saying, hey, if you ever run the phrase helpers.run query.
Hey, Ahmed.
What's up?
We had a question about .bind.
Yeah, okay. That's a great question. I'm going to kind of give you not the best answer, but I do know what it's for. So one of the most confusing things about switching from ES5 to ES6 is this syntax right here. It's basically a way of saying that like whatever comes out of this result is bound to this component. I would not sweat the syntax here because when you switch to ES6, which you may, if you use React in the workplace, you won't use syntax that looks like this. It'll be slightly different. But in this case, I would honestly say, like, if you look at every example for how componentDid update is used in the context of like a call, we'll always say bind this. So it's basically saying run this query, bind the results to the component. Who asked that question?
I think it was Tom, yeah.
Yeah.
Me.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, like, you know, the bigger thing to take away from this entire like lesson isn't the syntax, because the syntax will change probably in like 6 months of you working with React. If not React, like you will learn new syntax or you will work on a new library. The bigger picture to take away from it is React is presenting a fundamentally different way to organize code than we had been doing previously. And there are advantages to at least knowing how to think in this context. All right, I hope that wasn't a cop-out answer, but that is a true answer. All right, so yeah, I might have to just kind of defer this one to my video because I really spent a lot of time talking about this specific explanation. But the main takeaways from this example are we have a helpers function that is basically where we're running our Axios calls, and our components are making use of that helpers function to run queries. And the values are basically being transferred from form up to the main application. And the main application is calling Axios. And then Axios is providing back the result of the address, which is then being passed back to results, this component. But I'll defer to the other video that I'll be sharing with all of you. Actually, which I'll do right now. Let me share that with you guys. I'm going to share that with you in the chat, so you get a chance to connect with that. Great. So let's see. That actually concludes the 19.1 and 19.2, all of what I wanted to cover today. We covered a lot. I would say if there are 3 takeaways that you want to know about React, again, it goes back to the 3 things: components, states and props, and lifecycle events. And if you can talk even semi-cogently about that, it's a good first step in both figuring out how to dive deeper and also in talking about React's advantages to a potential recruiter. And with that, I'm gonna open it up for questions if there are any.
Ahmed, thank you for doing this class. The only thing is the link you said is sent is restricted, the YouTube link.
Let me go ahead and unrestrict it. Is it restricted? Strange. Oh, okay, let me give you, I think I know how to get it to it. 1 second.
It wasn't restricted for me.
Try it again. This should work. All right, you're supposed to know it. Yep. Any other questions or comments? Hopefully that was helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Cool. That's funny. In my class, I mean, Han, you heard this, like I did this in class too, but I guess the second time around doesn't hurt.
Yes, I mean.
It helps it sink in.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's like, it's just good to see it again.
Yeah, for me, it takes I think it's going to take a few runs for all of this to stick.
Han, Matt, and I just like hearing you talk.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Because we've been out of class too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going through boot camp withdrawals. It still feels that need.
That's right.
All right, gang. So if there are no questions, then, that was a good solid 2 hours. So we will call it a day. And then next class, I will take a stab at going through React Native. Don't get your hearts up. I mean, React Native is kind of screwy. So we'll see what we can do with it.
Cool.
All right, gang.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ahmed.
Is there any way to code without the simulator though?
No, there is no way to code without that simulator, unless you code on a phone directly.
Oh, okay. Because it's not working out for me for I cannot make
I'll be honest, on my old laptop, it never worked for me either. So I would not, React Native is not something you need to know how to do. It's very much like a beta project. It's just cool to understand the concept behind it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think in the context of finding a job, an employer will see React and React Native and kind of see them as the same thing. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, guys. I'll stick around for a minute or two if there's any questions, but if not, I will, talk to you guys tomorrow.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Ahmed.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.